Okay, I want to take a few moments now and talk about measuring. So if we're dedicated to the idea that we're after the character of the shape and that proportions are what are going to allow us to begin to get at the character of the shape that we're looking at, then measuring becomes important because that's going to allow us to find the correct proportions, right? So, so what I'm going to talk about right now is visual measuring, mechanical measuring, and then the use of halfway marks. So when we start off thinking about measuring, it's important to realize that what we're doing is we're basically comparing two things to one another, right? It could be relative lengths of that we're looking at, or the relative steepness of angles of lines. But a lot of what we do, a lot of the measuring that we do really comes down to looking at two lengths and comparing those. So you know, I think in visually measuring, we naturally do a lot of visual measuring. I mean, we do it constantly. When we're out in nature, we're not aware of it, but that's what we're doing. We're judging distances and lengths of things. But for some reason, when we come into an art classroom and we look at something on the table, some of those things that we do naturally just kind of go out the window. So I'll just say with visual measuring, it's important when you're comparing lengths to make sure that you are identifying your lengths very specifically for yourself. So what I mean by that is say if I was measuring this distance for this distance on the shoe, I would want to pick very specific points as endpoints for a particular line that I'm judging. So if I'm interested in this length, I want to make sure that I look and I find very specific beginning and end points to that length. Same thing here, like where am I looking for this length? Am I looking here, here, up there? Where is it? Like make sure that you really articulate to yourself the beginning and end points of each of those lines that you're measuring. Okay, mechanical measuring is something that I only do after I've visually measured. I always feel like it's important to rely on my eye first and then to check it with, if I have to, with a tool. And that way, I just feel like that process schools my eye a little bit better than, rather than starting off with a mechanical measurement. Again, I think it's good to just rely on your eye. So this is one measuring tool that we can use, just this straight knitting needle or shish kebab skewer. And I'll just explain the process to you. Some of you may know this, but it'd probably be good to hear it again. So what we're doing when we're using a tool like this is we're marking off a distance, right? So that the end is the end of one part of that line, and your thumb is going to represent the other end of that line. So I'm putting this up to one part of the line, that to the other, and then I'm going to compare it to some other line that's up there. When you're mechanically measuring, it's important to keep a number of things constant. You want to measure from the spot that you're drawing. In other words, you don't want to drift to some other part of the room, obviously, and measure where you're drawing from. So if I'm drawing from here, that's where I want to measure from. And then when you measure, you want to make sure that you keep your arm straight. Like you don't want to measure with your arm bent, because this can change the distance from this to your eye, and that's going to change that measurement. So it's very easy to do if your arm's not locked. So you want your elbow locked when you're measuring. You obviously want to stay in the same place. Like you can't drift around as you're measuring. You also want to make sure you're not moving your tool like this. So everything needs to stay constant through the process of measuring. And usually mechanical measuring, what I measure are sort of large distances. So if I was looking at this thing, for example, I might wonder, well, which one of these is bigger, this or this? And so I can measure that. What I wouldn't measure is maybe, you know, this length and how many times that goes into that whole length there. Too many things can happen when you're taking, or too many things can go wrong when you're taking a very small measurement, mechanical measurement, and then seeing how it relates to a much longer distance. So if I was measuring up there, I might just take the bottom bottle as a standard, and I would put my thumb at the bottom of the line and the top of this tool at the top of that purple jug, and then I would come up, and when I do that, I see that this length hits about right here. So this length is a little bit longer than that. So that's that's a helpful idea. And that kind of relates to, starts to relate to this idea of halfway mark. So our eye is pretty good at dividing things in half. And so we've already done a little bit of that with the vertical and horizontal that I've talked about. But for any length that you see, to wonder about where the halfway mark is. And that's a nice indicator. It starts telling you how the object is going to start dividing up. Once you start getting into your eye, trying to divide things into thirds or quarters, it becomes less adept at doing that. So, but halfway marks we're pretty good at figuring out. Same thing here. If I was looking at the, if I was looking at the shoe here, and I wondered where along this length, say this point came, where the rise in the boot started, to imagine a halfway mark and to see how that, that critical point related to the halfway mark is just to the right of the halfway mark, is it right on the halfway mark. So those are three ideas. You start with visual measuring, and then you use these other ideas, mechanical measuring, if you need to help you figure out the distances and halfway marks as well.